Hey, beautiful people, we're back for part two of our conversation with Brandon Johnson and Paul Vallas, candidates for mayor of Chicago. I want to thank both men for prioritizing the principals and assistant principals who lead Chicago's public schools by being so generous with their time. Today's clip focuses on something I call sacrifice-based budgeting, and I call it that for a reason. First, the way Chicago public schools used to fund schools was by putting teaching positions in a school budget based on the number of students in that school and the needs of those students. So if a principal had 81 third grade students in her school, she'd get 3 third grade teaching positions in her budget, and each teacher would have roughly 27 or so students. Then the principal could go and hire 3 teachers to fill those positions. Then, around 2013, CPS management adopted a different system, and this system was developed to defund schools. In this new system, instead of giving the principal 3 third grade teaching positions, they give the principal a lump sum of money. And more times than not, that lump sum was not enough to get 3 skilled veteran teachers. So what does the principal have to do if she wants 3 skilled teachers but doesn't have the money? Sacrifice. For example, when I was a principal, I hired licensed teachers to serve as academic intervention specialists to focus on developing the math and reading skills of our most vulnerable students, many of whom came from one of the 2 homeless shelters near our school. When the new budgeting system was dropped on us, I had to cut those intervention positions, meaning I had to take the services those teachers provided away from the students who needed them. That budget forced me to make those students sacrifice the services they needed so that we wouldn't have 40 kids in a classroom. And that is why I call it sacrifice-based budgeting. Ironically, the district calls the current system student-based budgeting, but the old system was based more on students' needs than the current one. The old one was grounded in meeting student needs. The current one is based on sacrificing the services that would meet those needs. Robert Croston, the late principal of Jenner School, told me that every time he got his budget, it was as if the district was telling him, find a way to fail your students. We'll give you the autonomy to figure out what you need to cut, and therefore how you're going to fail them, but you must fail them. One time in particular, he said, every time I have to cut something, I feel less like an education leader and more like a manager of educational hospice. Now, we can talk more about the analogy of hospice care and how it applies to the inequitable education received by the kind of children that Robert served, black, brown, and low income. But we have to get to the candidates and ask them what they're going to do about it. They're telling me I have to fail them, but you get to choose how. You can take this service, you can take that service, but you must take something from them. And so the question, Alex.
Will you commit to ensuring every school will be allocated a full-time district-funded principal, assistant principal, dean of students, clerk, nurse, school counselor, case manager, social worker, and technology coordinator without having to use school-based funds?
You mean the things that we guaranteed 20, 25 years ago? Absolutely. But let me get at this issue of school-based budgeting. The staff need to follow the kids, not the money, because I'll tell you who else gets penalized in that equation. That's veteran teachers. So you have a situation where they're so conscious of the budget that they've been allocated. Sometimes they have to choose between a veteran teacher and a new teacher, and those veteran teachers are being discriminated against. So at the end of the day, I have always felt that the staffing should follow the kids, and that's the way it was during our district. We put a premium during my years and Chico's years. But there's something else we need to do too. Right now, only about 60% of the money that actually is spent per pupil actually finds its way into the classroom, and we need to begin to decentralize the central office. We need to downsize the central office like we did in the 90s. We need to jettison some of these district-wide programs that are being run centrally and being imposed on local schools. And we need to push the money down to the local school level and allow the principals, with obviously the advice and input of their faculty, as well as the local school councils. Local school councils are still here. But what you have to do is you really have to push the money down to the local school level because, at least on paper, Enrollment has dropped by 11% since 2019, but yet per pupil spending on paper has grown by 40%. Your principals and your teachers are not seeing that in the schools or in the classrooms. And whether it's the Sodexo contracts or the earmark contracts or these system-wide programs or the system-wide technology purchases that they're making, the inefficiency is just depriving local schools of critical funds. So I have always felt that school-based budgeting means the positions follow the kids. School-based budgeting means the special ed dollars and the poverty dollars follow the kids with no or minimal interception at the state, because as you know, the district intercepts Title I funds and they skim the Title I money off the top. I believe that the money needs to follow the kids and that money needs to be put in the hands of the principals. And I believe that you should not discriminate against veteran teachers and younger teachers, quite simply because you've got this so-called school-based budgeting, which in effect ties the principal's hands rather than gives the principals more flexibility.
So if I heard that right, you would be in favor of going back to not just giving those positions, but going back to, I believe we call it the quota position system.
I support going back to that old system, while at the same time making sure that more of the money that comes through the district actually follows the children into their schools. So more discretion being made by the principals at the local level.
He said that with each cut, I feel less like an educational leader and more like a manager of educational hospice. Question.
Until SBB is replaced, will you commit to ensuring every school will be allocated a full-time, district-funded principal, assistant principal, dean of students, clerk, nurse, school counselor, case manager, social worker, and technology coordinator without having to use school-based funds?
That has to happen. Yes. And look, when we've been a part of a long struggle in the city of Chicago to make sure that our schools are fully funded. And one of the ways, of course, we know in which we must fully fund our schools is by making sure that we have adults in the building who are experts in their particular discipline that can actually put forth not just an equitable school, but a school that speaks to the needs of its students, and having a baseline of support with trained adults who actually can administer that in a school community provides comfort for students, for families, and then it alleviates the burden on one particular individual or a handful of individuals who have to comprise a budget and a school, off of very little, right? And so I'm very much committed to making sure that we are restoring, these positions so that the type of structure that needs to take place in a school is maintained as well as it's strengthened.
I want to take it a step further. Are you willing to end sacrifice-based budgeting with dollar amounts that may or may not meet student needs and return to a model based on staffing positions required to meet those needs?
The way our schools are funded right now, based upon per pupil, is quite damaging. We know that it's not equitable. It doesn't work, and so that's why I'm very much a proponent of the needs-based budgeting that we all went to Springfield and organized to shift. The entire state of Illinois has embraced this new funding model, except for the Chicago Public Schools. And so order number one is to make sure that Chicago Public Schools actually embraces a more equitable structure so that, one, we can actually get more money, right? Because we're leaving $1 billion on the table right now because we haven't embraced it. But two, so that we make sure that the school communities in which service our families, that principal and leadership autonomy is not a real thing if you don't have the resources that allow you to distribute the work equitably, so that we're not constantly placing the burden on the three adults who are tasked with programming, discipline, professional development. All the different things that administrators are being asked to do. So absolutely, I'm very much committed to making sure that the budget is reflected upon the organizing that we've done to change the funding formula in the first place, because I know that solves many of the dynamics that we are enduring right now and the type of pressure that's being placed on administrators because we do not have enough staff to be able to administrate the building.